emotionally it can be difficult because it can feel sometimes like, I'm out here with people that don't necessarily like me.
You're watching the Heavy Metal Therapist podcast, and today I'm joined by Aleksey, who's a tour manager who spent years behind the scenes working with heavy metal music and touring culture. And I think a lot of people see like the stage, the lights, the crowds, the excitement of like touring bands, but very few people see actually what happens behind the curtain. So today I want to explore the human side of touring from someone who's lived it firsthand. So do you want to introduce yourself and explain like what a tour manager will do on a day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Aleksey Weyman. I'm the founder of The Final Advance. We are a music touring and event operations company, and we offer touring resources like budget sheets, day sheet templates, educational courses, private workshops, and we also provide staffing for music tours. So we put people on the road in various positions. So I'm constantly sending out TMs, LDs, VJs, front of house, merch, monitors to music festivals, music tours, but as well as event operations for music festivals. That's kind of my main work now. I myself have been a tour manager for about 10 years. And I've been in the music industry about 15 years, and I've kind of done a lot of different roles, from the guitar techs and drum tech role to some front of house work to obviously TM work, which is kind of what I do primarily. And I've worked with all kinds of metal bands, rock bands, reggae artists, electronic EDM artists, kind of been all over. Yep.
That's fantastic. Was that kind of a dream for you, or is it just a natural development?
Yeah, well, I think it was pretty natural. I think, before I even was working in music, I worked in the corporate world. So I worked at Amazon and Apple for a number of years before I even went into music. And so I kind of had this realization that I wanted to be involved in music. And even then, at the time, I was already involved in local music venues. I was interning, I was doing hospitality work, some stagehand work, just on the side because I found the work enjoyable. And naturally, I think I'm the kind of individual who really looks into the details and logistics. I like looking at the details and the numbers and all the little moving pieces around, and kind of planning those things. So I naturally kind of progressed through that desire to be involved and that sort of inclination for logistics, which led me to then, just naturally doing that with some of the music venues I worked at, meeting the artists, meeting the management, meeting other TMs who then brought me on and kind of taught me a few things, and that kind of got me to where I am today.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, just the whole like touring world, because there's so many little parts that are moving to make the whole performance work, and people just think it's like 4 or 5 dudes on a stage making music and like that's it, and then they play for 30 minutes to get off and go, but they don't see that the whole picture and how much actually really goes into it. It's really cool because I've watched a friend of mine. He went from being a drum tech, and I met him when he was a drum tech for John Otto for Limp Bizkit, and then he was playing drums for Danny Filth's other band, and now he's the drummer for Machine Head. So it's just that watching that progression. And so is kind of tour managing where you've like, oh, this is where I want to be. This is the sweet spot right here.
Yeah. I definitely still have some aspirations to try some more technical work, specifically with audio and some video and some lighting work, just sort of as a side project. I think I'm really invested right now in growing The Final Advance, the company, because I've sort of found out about myself that I'm good with like being strategic and putting people in different crew positions and understanding their strengths and weaknesses. And so I'm really focusing on growing the community of The Final Advance right now. And we've got all kinds of tours coming up in the fall that I'm currently sort of putting people out on the road on and figuring out, where they fit and what like the rates look like and the logistics. And so that's kind of where a lot of my emphasis is now. But of course, I am actively TMing as well. I'm constantly on the road. I'm going to be in a couple days I fly to Europe. I'll be in Europe for about a month, and then we have another headline tour in the fall, some support runs closer to the winter. So I am actively engaged and involved in the TM world, and I do enjoy it. Yeah, but I think now with my experience and with the amount of kind of connections I have and the way that the Final Advance is growing, I'm really now stepping into a position where I'm able to empower other people to come in as TMs or as, front of house, LD monitors, and put them onto various tours and kind of help coach them and get them up to speed. And hopefully, if they enjoy it, make that a full-time thing for them.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love the concept behind that. It's funny because I actually found your video. I was on the way to. I do part-time work as well. Unfortunately, therapy doesn't pay the bills for some reason, but because I'm very selective who I see as a client, and so I was walking to my part-time job, and I started watching that video where you were talking about here's 5 things that I do to make sure check with the venue and the various things that you do when you get in before the band even plays, and I'm like, I was invested in what you do. So that was the main reason I wanted to reach out and get you on here, because I think what you do is so important, but it's so vastly under recognized. Yeah. How did you first get into touring and working within the scene?
Yeah, so I go back in time 15 years. I was when I was working my day job, I had a strong desire just to kind of be involved in music, and I was in band growing up, in high school and grade school and elementary school, so I was kind of always around music. In fact, my senior project when I was in high school, like I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with this, but like where I went to school in my area, when you reach a certain grade and you're about to graduate, you have to do like a bit of a thesis, like a bit of a capstone project, which is like your big project to end the year. And so mine was I organized a music event. I hosted a school concert.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And, it's funny looking back, hindsight now, it totally makes sense to me why I'm doing the work that I do now, because I did that. But at the time, it was just something cool. I was always fascinated with putting on a show, the production, the lighting, but even like the behind the scenes, the logistics, like how does the crew get hired? How do we sort the finances? How does the logistics of the routing work? What about the technical, the electrical stuff? Like, that was all really fascinating to me. And so I did that, and all throughout college and then throughout my full-time day job, I was interning at a music venue. It was actually a nightclub. It was an electronic nightclub. And I primarily did hospitality. So I provided green room riders. I went out and shopped for the snacks and the drinks that the artists needed. I would bring drinks to them on stage. I would make sure their guests were taken care of. And I did that actually for a long time for free. And a lot of people, I feel like, kind of in the scene, and I don't disagree with them, have this strong stance of like, you should never work for free, right? But I personally, and sometimes I get scrutinized for this, I believe that especially when you're starting out, you have to be willing to do some extra work. And sometimes that extra work is not paid. So my first 2 years of internship at this venue was free. I would work a day job, 9 to 5, and then go to the club from 10 to 3 a.m. And I would do it for free. And I just enjoyed being in that world. And I think that naturally that sort of was demonstrated through my work ethic. And kind of fast forward a couple years after starting that, I became a core member of the team there. I was promoted several times to actually a paid position finally, because it was a no-brainer. I was the one there doing all the work. And then naturally, because I was already in hospitality, I came in very close proximity with artists and management and agents and sort of that world. And they started to know who I was. And then naturally, I kind of expressed interest in helping them at other shows, other venues, other cities. And that one thing led to another. And eventually I started traveling with those artists.
Dude, that's so fantastic. It's so funny how similar our stories are in a weird kind of way. Because when I was at college, I was doing art and design, and one of our projects was to like print a poster, like screen print a poster. And I was like, well, I designed like a band poster, and I was like, wow, why don't I just put on a band? And so I went out and booked like 3 bands and actually utilized college resources and printed like 1,000 posters because it was part of a project. And yeah, that was fun.
That's
We had
cool.
like 400 people turn up to that show, and it was just like that was like an in for me because I was like, I'm going to put my band on first so that you know I'm booking the show, I'm going to play as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's so cool. So at what point did you realize this job was far more than like logistics and schedules, and it actually involved emotionally managing people as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, even from when I was first starting out, there was always this, coming from the corporate world where, corporate world has HR and all these systems in place to like standardize employment. As soon as I started working in music, I realized that was not the case. There's a lack of regulation. There's no like standardized way that people work. Every tour, every venue, I mean, there are some like things that people sort of follow as standard protocols, but like personalities are very different. You're working with very different kinds of people. Even me as a tour manager today, like my role is not always the same thing. With some of my clients, some of my artists that I work with, I am everything. I do everything from the tour budgeting to hiring the crew, the buses, all the production, doing all the routing, advancing every show, settling every show. I do it all from the beginning to the end. With some of my other artists, I am much more so like a handler. Like I'm on the road with them, just making sure that they're okay, like their transportation is sorted, but the show's already been advanced or the settlement's already been done remotely, right? And so like I think that lack of like regulation and sort of consistency in the type of work that I do or the type of work that we do in the music industry together kind of opens up the playing field to a lot of emotional difference and a lot of emotional situations that you can't really predict or plan for. One of my first bus tours, it was my first time in a bus. Everybody has to do that, right? Kind of on their climb, that first bus tour. It was very unique, because like it's not what it seems like from the outside, right? You're just doing these shows, like you're only really on stage each day for a couple of hours, and then you have a very long window for load in, build, load out, and then you're in a bus, living with strangers. Like people ask me sometimes through the final advance on social media, they'll message me or comment in some of my videos. They'll ask like, what's the one thing that I need to practice or learn in order to go on tour? Or what's the one thing I need to be really good at in order to be considered to go on a music tour? And honestly, it's very seldom the technical. It's very seldom like a very finite skill they need to know. It's more so, I tell people, you need to know how to coexist with people. You need to know how to live with strangers because you're going to be on a bus with 13 other people that you maybe have never met. And now you're sharing a living space with them. And it's the little things. It's like sometimes the fridge gets full or stinks because somebody forgot to throw out their food. Somebody, maybe it's people, they leave their dirty shoes in like bunk alley in the back, and their socks are smelling up the whole place. Or somebody uses the toilet on the bus, or somebody keeps putting their backpack on the front lounge couches. It's like really little things that you wouldn't think matter, but when you're on the road living like this for months, sometimes years at a time, I find that that's the most important thing that especially new people need to understand about getting into this work is like, you have to be comfortable with that. You have to be comfortable being a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think it's almost as well being comfortable with a nomadic life. It's almost like, you know, you spend so much time out on the road and you're in a different place every night. Um, and I think as well, it's just like, when you're living with people, you've got a room. You can hide away. You don't have to like confront them. But when you're in that such confined space, not only do you have to be like considerate of other people, you have to maybe have a little bit more grace with people, because this is like, it's kind of how they are. It's just, let's try and work a compromise out of here. And it's just
Yeah.
exactly why I got you on here, man, because it's these things that like people just don't think of. And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
don't see. Yeah. On the outside, touring can look exciting and glamorous, but what does the reality actually look like behind the scenes? And I think we've started to touch on that a little bit, but is there anything else that you feel that really people just don't see that, you know, other than everything,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that's definitely a little bit unique about working in this type of work, and for me as a tour manager, this is kind of like a personal experience that I have, and a lot of crew individuals have this as well. I constantly operate in this sort of gray area of what I call functional relationships instead of emotionally safe relationships, right? Because as a tour manager for me, I'm on the road with my crew, with my band, with management kind of on the side. I'm a friend to everybody. We try to be friends. We try to be, like good chums on the road. But at the same time, in my position, I'm also in charge, right? And so I directly impact things like logistics, people's pay, finances, schedules. And so, I also talk with management, right? So there's a sort of like functional relationship that affects me as a tour manager. It's kind of like a coworker relationship, right? So it's kind of like you're kind of balancing this. It can lead to feelings of like being underappreciated or maybe not cared about when you're constantly thinking about how you have like the person you're interacting with is just doing their job, right? They're not like necessarily your friend, or things like that. And for me personally, as a TM, I kind of have to bear that burden of being the sometimes the bad guy, right? That has to like make decisions that make people unhappy. And so emotionally, it can be difficult because it can feel sometimes like, I'm out here with people that don't necessarily like me, or that don't necessarily consider me a friend. Or if they do, they know that on the back end, there's like this, like professional relationship or this functional relationship that has to exist. So, that kind of mindset leads to things like emotional burnout, right? You have this constant stream of emotional charge on the road that doesn't ever fully recharge because you're on the road, you're working under really tight schedules and pressures, so you always feel like you have to be 100%, but obviously that's not always the case in real life. You need to decompress and recharge, and that can lead to loneliness, right? Feeling disconnected on the road, feeling like you can't ever really trust anybody. And it can lead to occupational stress, right? Your nervous system sort of begins associating your work with emotional neglect or hyper-independence, and then that leads into all these post-tour depressions and other things like that. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I started the Final Advance, was because I want to nurture this community and have a space where the touring professionals or the beginners or people that have been touring for a long time or just want to get into the industry have a place to come together and sort of just even sometimes just laugh about the funny stuff, laugh about the silly stuff, right? Just kind of create that environment where people feel like they're not alone and they're not isolated, and that they can, even as simple as just going to Instagram and watching some of our videos. And it's like, oh yeah, I've been there. I remember the House of Blues Chicago load-in. Terrible day for me, but now we can laugh about it together and kind of have that sense of like community.
Yeah, because to that as well, it's like where you have this, as you mentioned, the functional relationship. It must leave you in a very lonely place at times because you kind of don't want to maybe necessarily bond with someone more than someone else because it looks like favoritism or and so that where you are the one that everyone comes to. It's just like where do you share your emotions? And so I like the way you're building a foundation for that for other touring artists and production team.
Well, and for me, I think the way that I kind of protect myself in those types of environments is I am kind of blessed in that, I have a bit of a corporate background, which may seem boring at the surface level, but I think it really has taught me the importance of like separating myself from the work and creating sort of these systems. Like I'm a very big believer in having a lot of standard operating procedures on tour. like on the final advance, we provide like budget templates, we provide per diem templates, we provide day sheet templates, master tour templates, like, because I believe that if I can standardize and kind of create these systems around touring and around like the logistics of what needs to happen on tour, I can rely on those to be like the backbone for having a successful tour. Because sometimes, keeping a tour running with all these different personalities and exhaustions and stress like all coming together can be difficult. And I find that if I rely purely on me and like me as a vessel and a person and a soul and a personality to run that and be like the backbone of it all, like it's kind of a slippery slope, and it's also dangerous for me and my own psyche. And so I like to really lean into having these procedures and these just a very simple example of like the day sheets, and like having like, I'm such a big believer in day sheets on tour because they just create a backbone for the day, and it's like, yes, things may change. The schedules could change, things get broken or lost, and now load in takes longer or sound check takes longer or whatever. Things happen, but we have this system in place that at least we can look to as a source of guidance and then do our best to follow it. And then that way, if something happens, it's not like blaming people. It's not like blaming you or blaming him or her or whatever. It's like, things happen. Let's just get back on schedule as a team.
Yeah. I've been on tour with a band quite a few times now, and their tour manager, he just gets the brunt end of all their jokes and stuff. And like when I first met him, I thought he was just such a grumpy dude. Like, he just hated everyone. And it wasn't until like I really helped out in an extraordinary situation, and he was like, I really appreciate you for that. And I was just like, oh my God, I was like nearly crying because I was so grateful that he like acknowledged me, because usually he's just like, morning, and just like really to the point. And I think it's like that with with what you do. It's that you have to be that kind of personality sometimes.
Yeah, I've had some experiences similar. Yeah, it's and it's tricky because like as a tour manager, we as tour managers, we have to be the backbones because we have to make sure the tour continues. But we're working with creative individuals. We're working with talent. We're working with personalities that are sometimes bigger than life. And that's, I think that my belief is it's not our jobs as TMs. This is my philosophy, and many people could disagree. But, my philosophy is it's not my job to judge the person, judge the artist, judge the personality. At the end of the day, I'm here to do my job. And my job is to make sure this tour is operated and is executed successfully on all fronts. And if that means that I have to deal with a personality of an artist or maybe even a crew member, that so be it. That's what it is. It's not, I'm still going to have to be that voice at the end of the day. And so I do have to realize the fact that I may not be very liked sometimes, and I've definitely had some tours where I'm just, I'm looking at that travel day at the end. That's like, I know we're almost there. I'm going to just push through this, and, we're going to finish this tour. And, maybe afterwards we can kind of recap and figure out what the right move forward is. But in this moment, I'm going to keep pushing on.
Yeah. Have you ever walked away from artists like after you've worked with them and like never again?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. So one thing about me, I'm completely sober. I don't drink or do any drugs, and I've been that way for quite a few years now. And a lot of the tours and artists that I work with are the same way. They're completely sober tours, and I really enjoy that kind of environment because at the end of the day, this is their careers, it's their jobs, it's our business together. Like I want to work with professionals. But of course, being that it's music, I recognize and accept and understand the fact that sometimes artists are going to drink, they're going to party, they're going to do drugs. It's just a reality of it. And it's not my job to judge, right? I don't ever judge that. Like I've worked with clients who are absolutely that, doing cocaine until 4 a.m, missing their PJs or missing their bus calls or vans or whatever they are. Just so they can party, and then now I have to scramble and figure out how to get them to the next city while the crew's already on their way. Like I've had to do that many times. it's just the nature of the work. And so there have been some artists I've worked with where at the end of the run, I was like, you know what? This isn't really the life I kind of want to have. You know, I don't want to have this stress. You know, I can feel my emotional stress welling up throughout this tour. Maybe the money's great, but I've walked away from tours that had really great pay, but did not have that like sort of emotional stability and safety that I kind of was looking for. And luckily now I'm in a position with the final advance with the company and sort of my experience and resume that I'm not usually, you know, struggling to find tours. I'm usually working with a few different groups at one time. So if this was back in the day where I was desperate for money and I needed to work, I would continue doing that sort of thing. Probably at the cost of my emotional sanity, but I needed the money, you know. These days, I kind of have the luxury of picking and choosing the groups I work with, which is nice.
That's really awesome. I love that you've got to a place now where you can do that, and you can, you know, choose to say no if it doesn't fit in with your ethos and, you know, your lifestyle. And yeah. Have you ever had moments on tour where it's just everything has just become so overwhelming?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, sometimes there was one tour I remember several years ago, and it wasn't my first bus tour, but it was the first bus tour I did where we had two buses, and we brought out a pretty significant lighting package, ground package. And I, at the time, sort of underestimated the bearings on the trailers and how much weight they could carry. And so, you know, we had this fantastic rehearsal session. We were in a studio for like 3 or 4 days. Everything set up, looked great, full show, fantastic. You know, and then we started to load out and load into the trailers to go out to the first city. And I remember we overpacked the trailers, both of them. They were overweight and overpacked, like to the brim, to the point where we were like shoving the trailer door like closed and having two people hold it while we put the latches down, you know? And I was like, oh my goodness, this is not good. And the production company where we were doing the rehearsals actually had to, because the first show was about 4 hours away, so it wasn't too far. I think it was in Omaha, actually, Nebraska. And the production company actually had to get a box truck and drive some of the remaining gear to the first show that couldn't fit in the trailer. And so talk about like drama on the first day, right? Because then it's like, okay, well, what do we do after this first show? Like the reason we didn't realize that this wouldn't fit, or I didn't realize it wouldn't fit until the very last moment. You know, it was midnight. We were about to close the trailers and we're like, well, we still have 4 or 5 lighting carts that need to get packed, but the trailers are full. What are we going to do? So like I had to make a decision. I was like, okay, well, you know, obviously we have to cut something. So like, let's just get to the first show, do the first show. And then we can talk about it as a team in the morning, because at that point the artists were already asleep. And, you know, in that particular group dynamic, the artists had a lot of say in the production because they were financially invested, but also creatively they wanted to have contributions. So I couldn't just make that decision alone. I had to get everything to the first show, do the first show, and then make decisions to cut and reduce things so that the trailers would fit. And that was stressful, right? And so like, and then the rest of the tour, there's always little things that pop up. You know, I think that a lot of the stresses that come from a music tour are like those little things, like the death by 1,000 paper cuts, they say. And it's like the bad ego here, you know, the bad stagehand here, the flat tire here. One day, you know, one of the band members' suitcases got damaged in one of the bays and they threw a huge fit about that. So it's like little things like that really start to add up and kind of eat at the morale of the team.
Yeah. Oh man, I tell you what, I don't miss trailer Tetris, but yeah. If just as we bring this to a close, if someone was feeling really burnt out, isolated, or mentally exhausted in their own life, what advice would you have for them?
Like somebody on tour specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, one of the things that I found to be helpful when it comes to managing this kind of emotional pressure and weight, especially on tour, is I always try to separate the emotion from the work first. So I always try to recommend, like, try to remove your emotional self from the situation. It requires some self-reflection, but at the end of the day, like me as a TM, again, I work with very interesting, wild, sometimes aggressive personalities. I have to step away from those moments and just understand that that is the kind of person I'm working with, but my job is still here to do my job, right? So like I emotionally kind of remove myself, and sometimes maybe that comes across as like me being cold, but really it's a protective measure. And I think anybody who feels that kind of weight or pressure emotionally on tour should try that. I had a media person one tour, a fantastic photographer, videographer, great guy, really nice guy. But he was constantly under stress because he was being told two different things. Artists on the tour wanted a specific type of asset, and then management wanted their own types of assets. And unfortunately, the manager-artist relationship wasn't very healthy. So like they didn't have a good cohesion. So this media person was constantly trying to make both parties happy, but at the same time failing both ways. And it weighed on him heavily, you know, and I saw it in his face, in his work. And obviously, like we talked about it, like he approached me and he asked me like, you know, how would you handle this? Or like, how, you know, what do I do? Like, am I right for feeling this way? And I think some of the times people just need to be heard, you know, they just want a space to vent and talk about their frustrations. Like it's so interesting because this world of touring, it's so unregulated that sometimes it feels like the problems you're experiencing are like too silly to bring up, right? Like, oh, you know, like Tom always takes his shoes off in bunk alley and it stinks back there. Now I can't sleep. And it's like sometimes people feel like even things like that are too small to bring up. And so they don't. And then they just kind of keep it bottled up. And that, you know, turns into more and more stress and emotional weight. I think it's absolutely fine to bring those things up, and it's important to. And that's why, like through the Final Advance, you know, the touring and events company I have on social media, we post all these videos of behind the scenes and funny little, like one time I posted a picture of I was in my bunk and the person above, I was in the middle bunk and somebody above me was like climbing up and my curtain was open and they had their bare feet like on my bed trying to crawl up and their toes were all dirty and like crooked and I took a picture of it and it was a funny moment. You know, those types of things can really upset somebody, but we turned that into a funny moment. And in the comments, and everybody was like, oh man, like I've been there, like that sucks. Or like, haha, it looks like Gollum from The Hobbit or whatever, you know, like making fun of his toes. And it's little things like that, I think, that really just create a space where people can feel, can kind of feel part, like they're not alone, right? In like having those insecurities or problems or emotional burdens. And I will say, just lastly, as a quick just add on there, the third thing I recommend, you know, so the first is separate the emotion from the work. The second is find the community. So like for us, the Final Advance, but then also take some time off. Taking some time off, I think, is important. You know, off days, like if you have an off day, you know, take it for yourself. Do what you need to do, you know, like to really give yourself a chance to emotionally process what's going on and also, you know, detach and reflect and just kind of be in your element, you know, get in the hotel room and take a bath, you know, eat some Cheez-Its in the bathtub, you know, whatever you need to do.
Sounds fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Aleksey, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for joining me. It's been incredible. I kind of want to do a part 2 with you, I think, at some point. Where can people follow your work and keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Final Advance is probably the best place to keep up with what I'm currently working on. We're on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. We do all kinds of live workshops. Like just a couple days ago, I did a workshop on tour budgeting, and I had some folks come out and we did a workshop on how to build tour budgets. So I'm constantly doing educational material, sharing resources and templates. And we also have a job board on the Final Advance. So I'm constantly looking for people. Yeah, so I'm constantly looking for people to send out on the road in different positions or maybe one-offs. And that's all done through the Final Advance. So it's thefinaladvance.com, THEFINAL advance, ADVANCE.com, but also on social media, Instagram at The Final Advance, YouTube at The Final Advance. That's the closest place in there, and I'm very frequently in the comments with my personal social media accounts as well. So you'll see me there.
Dude, Aleksey, dude, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for having me. This has been great.